the reality is that today technology is at our fingertips now. And so that time horizon has really shrunk. And so we think about innovation both in its everyday evolution of what needs to happen in the payments landscape, but also what are those leapfrog moments going to be and how can we push things further?
Avery, happy Tuesday for us. I know this podcast comes out next Monday, but great to see you. You just got off of a very successful VCon. Give us the dish. How was it? What was the highlight for you? How was LA as a market for this? Tell us everything.
Sam, you absolutely need to be at the next VCon. And Gen Z, I would love to see you all at the next VCon. I know I saw some of you all there. This was year 3 of 3 of Gary's original promise at VCon. So the VFriends community came out strong. The VaynerX community of sort of marketers and business folks came out really strong too. It was an action-packed 3 days at LA Live. I thought this year the Vayner speakers and the VFriends teams took it even up more of a notch. Just in terms of production value, I think we really mastered that and nailed that. Social output was really strong. And speakers, it's easier to get people to LA, especially creators and talent people since they live there versus some of the other cities that we've done. I thought it was outstanding. There's still a lot of talk of crypto, and honestly, there's still a pretty strong NFT community who's attending. So it was really nice to have that as well. I feel like sometimes, and even us on our podcast, we've grown a little bit and evolved the conversation, but I mean, it's fascinating to see so many of these people who are really united by this community aspect and, really bullish on the future of these digital collectibles. And in Gary's closing keynote, he talks a little bit about the things that the team's been doing to really build the brand, from physical collectibles to activation events to experiential things like VCon, to a lot of the talent partnerships to the merchandise strategy. It just takes a long time to build an iconic brand. And chipping away, I think we're going to look back in 5 or 10 or 50 years and say wow, all these little breadcrumbs that Gary and the team were doing really added up to something. So I'm still bullish. It was an incredible show. And Gary also announced this will not be the last VCon. There will be another one. TBD on exactly how that format will be. I think we're going to shape some things brainstorming, but it is not the last VCon. So I better see you at the next one.
A little alpha, everyone. VCon is not going anywhere. I also love that you guys had T-Pain, Flavor Flav. You really brought hip hop to the forefront, which is a personal passion of mine.
Yes. T-Pain honestly brought it. It was like a Sunday night. And it's one of those things where are people going to come on a Sunday night to a concert? There was an after party that our amazing friends at Diageo did with us. And it was packed. The VFriends community just goes hard. People loved it. Everyone was dancing in the concert arena and, staying out till the wee hours. And T-Pain really brought great energy. And Saweetie, by the way, is also fabulous.
Sweetie it is. All right, speaking of music, Avery, an article came out that I was really interested in, which was shifting our focus to the political spectrum, which is wild right now. But it was really about how Kamala Harris's team is utilizing sound specifically as viral trend, right? Got a little bit of insight when I was in LA last week with a friend of ours who shall not be named, but they're in the studio almost every day making different remixes of Kamala, of Tim Walz, of Trump, all of these things, releasing them out on TikTok and putting them out there for others just to do their thing with. And some of them are really catching on. And it just really made me think, again, I want to hear your opinion. You've talked a lot about the idea of commenting and sort of other ways you engage social. I wanted to get your thoughts on the idea of creating sounds as a way of getting virality.
1,000%.
Tell us more about your thoughts.
1,000%. We're big believers in sort of the power of sound and sonic branding, everything from the sounds that we have for VaynerX and VFriends and Gary's own brand. Those are incorporated. I think in the last 2 years, just because TikTok viral sounds, and now that's been replicated on Instagram. Yeah, it really matters, especially if you can find those ridiculous little clips did you just fall out of a coconut tree and whatnot,
right,
that people just think are ridiculous. And you can link that to a good beat. Those can go crazy viral. And once they start going viral, also enabling that to match with templates, because CapCut and Reels have different template formats that can then basically become suggested sounds to people. So if you can hack the algorithm through a catchy sound, get a few of the right people using it, it takes off. And there's also like a science to like the time that you want to jump on one of those trends, which is like when it's on the up, not when it's like completely already gone viral. It's a huge strategy. And for brands as well, for creators, you can be a little bit more like open and playing around with things, and you can use like popular music. For brands, you have to be careful of owning those sounds. And I think that the campaign is doing a great job with capturing those. And, not to make this political at all, but a lot of this perception is going to be influenced by what happens on the social platforms, especially perception amongst Gen Z and millennials on places like TikTok. So it's very smart.
I would also say, and I think this is about, almost like a playfield equalization opportunity. Trump, whether you like him or don't like him, he's imminently memeable, right? He says things every single day that are turned into memes. He has that sort of style that just is clippable to all ends. And Biden didn't have that. No. Whereas I think Kamala is bringing that. Tim Walz certainly has some of that quality too. And I think the team recognizing that probably just says, oh, we have so much more to work with now. And so now it's, you can equalize that playing field of like, maybe we can both be memes.
Totally. You need a hook. Like no one wants to like watch something boring, something vanilla. You want to have something that's differentiated to stand out.
Absolutely. All right, Avery, the third story I want to ask you before we jump to our amazing guest today is I just saw an announcement that Squid Game, the experience is coming to New York City. Why this caught my eye was the idea that we've talked a little bit about, just about how brands are going full 360. And so the fact is, I thought this was just a license deal. But then when I went to the website for Squid Game, the experience, it's from Netflix. So It's their experiential team. They already have video games in the Apple Store and the Android Store. They already have now a reality show spinoff they did. They're also announcing Squid Game 2 coming. So it feels like they looked at this as an IP opportunity, and now we're doing a full surround of that. So I just wanted to get your thoughts on, brands creating their own experiences versus like licensing the stuff out, especially around IP like a Squid Game that you can really make immersive. What are your thoughts?
I think it's genius. I think it's pretty aligned to the strategy we just talked about for VCon, right? Instead of just licensing something out, building it yourself, making it your own, also turning that into a potential additional monetization opportunity. Look at Disney World. I also think that we should make an effort to have Natalia on from Netflix, a dear friend of mine. Just saw her at VCon last week. She's doing the sort of consumer product side of Netflix. So Netflix, they've got a lot of smart cookies over there, and we should get them onto the pod.
All right, Wen, make a note. We're getting Natalia on. All right, everyone. After the break, Vanessa Colella, Head of Innovation and Digital Partnerships at Visa. You do not want to miss this conversation. We'll see you in a second.
See you in a minute. Vanessa, thank you so much for joining us today on Generation C. We are so honored to have you.
Thank you. Appreciate the invitation.
Let's start off with a nice little softball. Can you tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do at Visa?
Sure. So delighted to be here today. So Vanessa Colella, I am the Head of Innovation and Digital Partnerships at Visa. So that means a couple different things. It means that I care for all of our relationships in the digital space. So imagine like large tech clients that we work with from Apple, Alphabet, and Alibaba, all the way to the long tail of fintechs. So Visa partners with fintechs of all shapes and sizes around the world. And we spend a lot of time trying to cultivate both innovation that is happening at large tech firms and as well as sort of down the line to smaller fintech companies that are still driving innovation in so many markets. I also run our crypto stablecoin work. So we can talk about that. There's lots of exciting happenings in that space. And we've really been, I think, at Visa on the forefront of exploring and experimenting with how do we use new technologies to bring those technologies into the payments landscape. And then finally, I run innovation for the company. We've got many innovation centers and studios around the world. At Visa, we think it's important that innovation happens both globally, but also locally, because the payments infrastructure is actually quite distinct market by market. And obviously regulation is quite distinct market by market. And so we feel like it's important to have both that global look at how we can bring safety and standardization to the payments landscape, and at the same time, really have our finger on the pulse of what's happening in local markets.
Not a small job, Vanessa. Seems like you got a lot on your plate. I'm interested it's amazing. I'm interested just in the realm of what does it mean to be innovation at Visa? You guys work across so many different areas, so many different partners, as you mentioned. You literally touch every corner of the planet. So when you think of innovation, you also have to think of things, I assume, that can help an individual and can help billions. What's sort of the remit of innovation for Visa?
Yeah, so I guess I'll just start with how I think about innovation, which is I think about it not as something that one team does, but much more as a mindset of how everybody at the company has to come to work every day. In some ways, Visa is probably the oldest fintech, right? We've been around for more than 60 years. We were at the forefront of bringing technology to financial services to try and connect the globe. And so when we think about innovation, we think about it as part of our core DNA, not a separate thing. And I think that really helps because years ago, people used to talk about near-term innovation, long-term innovation, the famous, three horizons. The reality is that today, technology is at our fingertips now. And so that time horizon has really shrunk. And so we think about innovation both in its everyday evolution of what needs to happen in the payments landscape, but also what are those leapfrog moments going to be and how can we push things further? And that is, like I said, both work that happens at the innovation centers and studios, but it's also innovators at Visa and how do we get the whole company really focused on what the future looks like. And the amazing thing about working at Visa is that that's, as I said before, it's been such a core part of who we are that while I feel honored to shepherd this, it's really more about how the company operates than it is about any individual project or any individual team.
I think you're bringing up such a great point. I recently listened to, I believe it was the Acquired podcast on the history of Visa, which was absolutely fascinating. I actually sent it to all the Vader folks who work on the Visa business because I kind of knew, but I really didn't know Visa has long been like a tech pioneer. Of course, it's financial services, but born in Silicon Valley. It's such an interesting story. And Vanessa, you've been a huge part of that. How long have you been on your journey with Visa?
So I'm actually relatively new to my Visa journey. So I've been here about 2.5 years. And it's been such a pleasure because, it's got such, as you say, a storied history of bringing new things, not only bringing new technologies, but frankly, bringing new people into the financial services ecosystem around the world and making sure that, thinking about inclusion and being the best way to pay and be paid is available to people and small businesses around the world.
They also touched on the early days of the Olympics in that podcast, which is fascinating, just sort of the worldwide positioning, which was a genius move, by the way. But anyway, we're here today to talk about innovation. And I would love to hear from your perspective some of the innovations that Visa has brought to the world and maybe some that you're particularly proud of.
Yeah, so it's always like trying to pick amongst your children, right? There's so many things going on. I'll just mention a couple that maybe are more recent. Obviously, as we just talked about, Visa's been bringing innovation to the world for decades and decades. So I couldn't begin to sort of list everything, but there are a couple things that are going on now that I actually think are both interesting and will help change people's behavior. And I'll preface this by just saying that I think in innovation, we sometimes get ourselves very focused on what a new technology is. And we forget that innovation really happens when there's sort of a change in technology, but also a change in people's behavior and sometimes sort of structural change that happens around that. So a couple things that we're doing right now. One, we're very excited about the Visa Flex credential, which is one of those things. I love innovations that once you hear them, you think, well, why wasn't it always that way? So the Flex credential is exactly what you would expect it is, which is why do you have to carry a debit card and a credit card? Why couldn't they both be part of the same credential? And you could just decide, for this purchase, I want to use points, or for this purchase, I'm more comfortable with debit, or I'm more comfortable with an installment, or I want to use credit. And that's the kind of thing that we feel is important to bring to market because it's not just about the tech that lies behind that, which is obviously super important, but it's also about enabling people to change and evolve their own behavior. And those are the kinds of things that get me really excited when we're working on something that leverages new technology, but also gives people or gives small business owners an opportunity to change and evolve the way, in this case, the way that they pay.
Vanessa, I want to jump into something you said earlier. You mentioned your involvement in the stablecoin piece of the Visa business. And here at CoinDesk, obviously, that's an area we spend a lot of time writing about, thinking about. We've also had folks like Kai Sheffield and some other folks from Visa come speak at Consensus, which has always been great. And I know you guys play in the creator side also quite a bit, but I've been just obsessed with the idea of stablecoins being, in essence, the in-game currency of the internet, and that this sort of borderless opportunity for payments to happen globally in one standardized format feels like a giant unlock for a networked economy. Can you talk a little bit about what you guys are building in stablecoins and why you sort of are committed to that being part of the future of Visa's innovation program?
So first of all, what I love about stablecoins right now is it's bringing together several areas of my own personal obsession, which we can certainly get into. In stablecoins in particular, I think, one of the things that Kai and his team have done recently, which is great, is they've started to work to bring sort of dashboards and data to bear, because there's still a lot of misinformation about, how much are stablecoins really being used, what are they useful for in the marketplace, and we think, being able to provide unfettered access to clean and crisp data about what's really going on in the world is quite helpful. I happen to think that from a stablecoin perspective, we're still at the beginning of the journey. We've obviously at Visa been, accepting things like USDC settlement for quite some time now in a pilot that we've been running to say, if you're already working in a stablecoin environment and you want to settle with Visa, just like we settled in 27 other currencies, why can't we settle in stablecoin as well? And how do we think about that just to make it easier for our clients? But we've also been on the forefront of experimenting with stablecoins, with CBDCs, helping regulators and governments think about how do they want to get involved in the space. And that's why I say, I think we're still at the very beginning. We are starting to see use cases. There's one use case that we're working on currently in Latin America, which is more on the tokenization side of things, really trying to understand if we could help to tokenize commodities, would that allow sort of different market dynamics? So we're working with a company called Just Token, and not only are they allowing farmers to tokenize their crops, which sounds sort of like, why would you be working in agriculture tokenizing crops? But the answer is because in some of these marketplaces where there's not sort of easy settlement, if we can bring new technology to bear, like tokenization, we can actually allow people to change the market dynamics. In this case, farmers in the past might have been able to pre-sell their crops, but really only to one buyer and therefore at a substantial discount, where now we can help them to pre-sell only the portion of their crop that they need to get liquidity from, and we can help them to leverage, additional buyers to sort of change what those dynamics look like. All of these are just examples to me of the very beginning, like the green shoots of what's going to happen in this space. And whether you think about stablecoins and cross-border, or various commodities markets, and using technology to really bring leverage to some of the players who have been kind of left out in the past, I think there's nothing but opportunity in front of us.
That's so fascinating. And I'm actually speaking to you live from our Mexico City office. So this is like, I think Latin America has so many huge use cases for crypto, especially across the region, and countries where the currency is a little bit less stable, and USDC actually plays like a real role in enabling broader usage of crypto. But I want to pull on one thing that you mentioned, Vanessa. You said that some of these projects are bringing together your own personal obsession. What did you mean by that? And what are some of the things that you're really interested in, just personally that you might get to be working on here at Visa?
So this is going to sound very nerdy, and it is, but I'm
Don't
very
worry,
obsessed.
we're nerdy.
I'm very obsessed with the supply chain, like the global supply chain. And I got obsessed with this years ago when someone told me, I'm sure, by the way, this statistic is outdated, but when someone told me that there's a $1.7 trillion gap between goods that are flowing around the world, whether we're talking about soy and corn or oil, or goods that are flowing all around the world, and liquidity for those goods. And the reason I got obsessed with this is that it's not the large suppliers or the large buyers that this liquidity gap affects, right? It's really the long tail. So if you think about it, if you have a lot of market power and you're part of the supply chain, you can kind of dictate payment terms. You can say, I want to be paid the minute that you get what I've delivered to you, or I want to be paid in 30 days, or you just got a lot of market power. So you can sort of say, here's how I want this. If you're a part of the long tail of the supply chain, if you're a farmer in Argentina, if you are a jeweler in the Ivory Coast, you don't have enough market power to dictate terms. And so that large liquidity gap is actually shouldered by the long tail of suppliers, which means if we could use Visa's network of networks and we could think about how we could connect people and businesses to inject liquidity into the long tail of the supply chain, you would actually free up all these small suppliers who right now are essentially really giving a loan to the rest of the
Floating.
supply chain. Yeah, they're sort of floating money for everyone, and really, as we all know, those small and medium-sized businesses are the lifeblood of economies around the world. And so this notion, whether it's stable coins or new technology or just new behaviors and new ways of connecting people, I think if collectively we start to think about bringing that supply chain together and we start to think about putting less of a burden on that long tail of suppliers. I'm not an economist, but you have to imagine, right, that has the potential to raise the GDP of markets around the world, which I find super exciting.
Vanessa, I would say there's even more there. And I'm going to say full disclosure, I'm an advisor on a blockchain supply chain logistics company. So I've done so
You're
much
equally
research.
obsessed.
Right. I did a lot of research into this. And the thing actually that not only I think you're spot on the liquidity opportunity for these small businesses, these farms locally, but even the idea of trackability and traceability on supply chain is becoming more and more important as we're seeing those being areas where we can see corruption, areas where we can see that materials that go into the goods and services that we use every day, we want to know where those come from. There's a great article, I think it was last week in the Journal, about how they want to utilize track and trace around deforestation around the rainforests, and the idea that you can have a farm that has to tag based on geo where the woods come from, so that this is not tainted materials that are going in to make your furniture, right? And so I think all of that is such a fascinating thing that this technology actually works really well for. And I think people don't recognize that like the metadata that comes within all of those ecosystems are the future of how we can feel comfortable about the goods and services that we consume and that we make. And like provenance of materials is to me much more interesting than provenance of art, even though that's something I'm also very interested in. And so I'm just fascinated that you guys are also thinking about that. I think that's such a great lever into also the future of how commerce flows around the globe.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about it, at Visa, we've already placed 10 billion tokens in the world, right? So like we have deep expertise in how do we sort of capture data, secure it, tokenize it, make sure it's safe. And so we're doing a lot of work, not just on tokenizing things like your credit card credential or your debit card credential, but exactly to your point, right? How do we tokenize data? And how do we then, whether you're thinking about a shopping experience or whether you're thinking about a commodities market or whether you're thinking about how do we better just connect this buyer and this seller in a trusted manner. We're firm believers that a lot of the technology that's available today, there's so many use cases for how do we bake in and bring in that information so that it can be used more efficiently and more effectively. And that's really, part of our core DNA, right? Is how do we marry that notion of transaction value between partners that might not know one another and the data that's important to go along with that. So whether you think about provenance or you just think about attribution, making sure that we're thinking about multiple uses of tokenization, including data tokens, is something that we spend quite a bit of time on.
That's so fascinating. And I think many of our community members in Gen Z are familiar with Visa. Like they have it in their wallet, they use it all the time, they know the sounds, they sort of think about the branding aspects, but probably are less so aware of some of the really important work that you all are doing, especially from the be paid side, right? Like many folks will be familiar with the consumer use cases of Visa, but less so sort of the enterprise use cases, which are truly like critical to the financial ecosystem. I know, Vanessa, that you're also involved in the MIT Media Lab. So you've been helping shape the way that they're thinking about early innovations. Is that something that's like a side project or integrated into your day job? How does that fit into your holistic strategy?
So first of all, I wouldn't say I'm shaping what the Media Lab does. I was lucky enough many years ago to do my PhD there, and so I developed a lot of affinity for really for the way that they solve problems, right? And the way I would describe that, and it goes back to your question earlier about innovation. In life, there's sort of strategic problem solving, and then there's kind of applied problem solving, and both are valuable for different things. But the Media Lab really focuses a lot on how do we take the theory, how do we take the strategy and apply it to places in the world that could benefit? And I happen to really love applied strategy. I think it's to me it's very satisfying because it's not only the theory of how something would work, but then you get to see in practice how it actually can change the world. So I've been lucky enough to serve on the advisory committee for the lab for the last several years. And really, well, I obviously try and help where I can. To me, it's also just a great intellectual benefit for me because I get to stay in touch with such a wide variety of different places where MIT and the Media Lab in particular are trying to push the envelope. And it helps me because, when I think about innovation, I think there are many ways to go about it. Some people sort of want to think very deeply about a particular problem. I like to take in lots of bits of data from different places and try and see patterns across, different industries, different technologies, and sort of pull those things together. And that's something that I think the Media Lab does quite well. And just, for me personally, to be able to be exposed to that on a regular basis means I'm benefiting from the thinking and the creativity of people who are solving very different kinds of problems than the problems that we solve at Visa, but that often have a kernel of something that I can take away and sort of apply someplace else. And so it's been a real privilege. It's always fun to go out to Cambridge and see what they're up to.
I will say, Vanessa, and I don't want to date you and your PhD, but literally the thing that got me into innovation was reading Being Digital by Negroponte, who was, I think, ran the lab of that back in the mid 90s.
You can
And
date me, Sam. It's okay.
okay, no, again, I don't know if you were there when he was there, but I mean, that book was one of the most influential books in my career of just seeing how the Media Lab saw the world changing and saying, I want to be a part of that world. So aspirational that you are also still involved.
Yeah, I was lucky enough to be there when Nicholas was there, and
Ah,
I
amazing.
think that notion, which so many people share today, and I know we're going to talk about creators a little bit, but of well, what if the world just were different? Like, what if I could actually change things? And that was part of the spirit of the lab that actually I think is part of the spirit of Visa as well, which is how do I not just think about it, but what if we could do something that actually changed things in the world and let's go out and make that happen. And that kind of spirit is always really infectious, I think.
Right. So Gen Z reading list, Being Digital, Nicholas Negroponte, read it.
Must read.
Must read. Like truly a must read. Vanessa, let's talk about creators in a second, but we can't not talk about sort of the revolution that is AI that's been sort of involving all of us. As Visa looks at that through the lens of finance and commerce, is that about these agents that are going to go do our shopping for us? Is that this about KYC and making that easier and detecting fraud in a more material way? Is it about enabling people to do the things they do much better from a creativity perspective and maybe like have to worry less about the logistics of how goods and services are managed or payments happen? What do you think that AI and Visa together look like?
So it's a great question. And as your listeners no doubt know, right, at Visa, we've been involved with artificial intelligence for the better part of 30 years, right? We've been using AI to build out fraud models. And the scale of it is, I always find it kind of interesting. It's like, we process 86,000 transactions every second. Those transactions have hundreds and hundreds of data elements. And VisaNet is kind of in the background making sure all this goes through and you're able to purchase something from someone you've never met and may never see again, and they may not know you and never see you again. And so So we've always been operating at a data scale that is kind of phenomenal, and therefore we've always been using, as cutting edge tools as we can to try and improve safety and security, et cetera. You asked what is AI and Visa and what's AI going to be a part of. I was around, it's talking about dating ourselves. I was around at the beginning of the internet. I remember writing down, long addresses on Gopher where you could go find a list of 10 things to look up. There's probably some online time machine that people can go back and look at. But I think we are so early on AI, right? As I said before, right, we get kind of wrapped up with the technology part, and we sometimes forget that change isn't about the tech, it's about how people's behavior changes. And I frankly think we're in early days on, do I think AI will help me shop? Absolutely. And for people who know me, you know that, like, if I never had to shop again, I'd be a very happy person. So to me,
Same.
the more and the faster that happens, fantastic. Will it help us fight fraud? Yes. Will it also, create all sorts of other fraud vectors and sort of tools for bad actors that we then have to grapple with? Yes. Will it change the way markets operate? Yes. Will it change advertising? Yes. Will it be a tool for creativity? Yes. And I think, all like any technologies, all of these things will have sort of pluses and minuses, but we as a species are incredibly adaptable. And so I think it's a really exciting time. I also think it's a time for us to be very vigilant, because the amount of disinformation in the world is so high, right? It's not just about transaction fraud, but when I think about Visa and AI, I also think about, we run a company that has been focused for more than 60 years on making sure the thing that you are trying to do is okay. So then I think about, wow, in the world of disinformation, what opportunity is there to learn from how we do that, to think about how do we sort of make the world better and reduce the amount of kind of random non-factual things that are happening, and sort of focus on what the thing is that you're actually trying to get done. I just think we're at the very, sorry, that was super meandering, but I just think we're so much at the beginning that the exciting thing about it, though, I read a study years and years ago, and this happens to be about gender, but just think about inclusion in general. But the study was about young women in college and intro to computer science classes. And basically it said, like women sign up for the intro to computer science class at the same rate as men do, and then they drop out. Because there's all this sort of theory of, writing whatever language it was in those days. This was a long time ago. And I'm forgetting the university. They changed the intro to computer science class so that it was all about what you could do if you knew how to program. And then what they found was that young women and young men graduated at the same rate from the class. They did equally well. They stayed equally interested. What I think is so exciting for your listeners is this is like blindingly obvious, right? It's blindingly obvious that if you understand blockchain, if you understand AI, you will be able to change the way things work in the world. It's not just a theoretical thing to study. You can actually at scale make change happen. And that's why I think it's just impossible to predict where things are going to go. It's more up to your listeners and your viewers to think, where do they want to take things?
I love that. More about the promise than like what's available today, because what's available today is going to change. AI today is going to be the long, URL Gopher string in the next few years, right? Like things just evolve really quickly. But you did touch on creators. And I think that this is an area that I've seen Visa do a lot of communication, a lot of strategy, a lot of programming around, because as the creator economy continues to grow, they sort of enter as almost being SMBs, entrepreneurs of their own. Can you talk a little bit about how Visa is partnering with creators both to pay and to get paid?
Yeah, so this is a space that's growing so quickly. The stats change all the time, but say 300 million people who are creators, more than half of those people who are actually making decent business out of this. My son is young, so he follows Mr. Beast, but it turns out like more
Everyone
people
follows
follow
Mr. Beast.
Mr. Beast than like live in many countries, right? Like it's not just this weird fringe thing. It's like an actual way that people are contributing to the economy. And so the first thing that we did at Visa when we got involved in creators was we said, well, what are the pain points if you're a creator? And turns out one of the pain points is you need to get paid, which sounds very easy, but actually, then you got to think about, okay, well, online, how do I tip people? How do I get early wage access? Because if you're a creator and you're depending on the virality of whatever you're putting out there, then waiting a week or two to get paid so you can promote your piece, it's over. So we've been very focused on, working with platforms that creators are on, as well as showcasing individual creators to think about what are those financial related pain points, in particular around getting paid. Because you mentioned earlier, people think about Visa as a way to pay, but Visa is also a way to get paid. We actually move money in both directions. And so we're able to use that technology to work not only with creators themselves, but with startups like Carrot, who are focused on, what are the banking needs of the creator economy, and how do we make sure that from a lending perspective, from a wage access perspective, et cetera, people are getting what they need. Again, I think we're early days still, but with things like Visa Direct, where we're actually able to move money into billions of endpoints around the world, we're able to get people access to funds more easily, and then funds that they can use easily, right? So if you're able to take in those funds on a Visa credential, then you can spend those funds everywhere that Visa is accepted. And so it just makes things smoother. And because we talked about small businesses earlier, but creators in a way are the new nano businesses, right? So they are a critical part of growing the economy, that sort of underpinning of the economy. And historically, the smallest businesses, the individual proprietors, in this case, the creators, were underserved parts of the economy. So at Visa, we're very focused on how do we not repeat that? How do we make sure as a whole financial services ecosystem, we're solving those challenges? And by the way, my suspicion from an innovation point of view, we talked about patterns earlier, is the kinds of things that creators want. Like, I'd like to be paid when I do my work. I don't want to wait to be paid. I've done my work. I'd like to be paid. Sort of, when I was a kid and you mowed the grass for, pocket money, you got paid when you got done mowing the grass. That's not something that only creators want. So I think about things like, what if you worked in the construction industry where there's general contractors and subcontractors? There's this cascade of kind of waiting to get paid. How could you make that industry so much more efficient and make companies who were able to pay people in a sort of faster, more seamless fashion actually stand out from other companies, make that a competitive advantage? So we're very interested in creators for sure. And then I'm like secretly interested in what is it that creators are actually telling us about where payments are going to go in the future. It's just that they're kind of on the cutting edge, and where else can we bring that to as a company?
Two things just came to my mind. One, Built Technologies, which is my friend from college started, actually is serving that need because the construction industry is so antiquated in so many different ways, but it's so massive. It's like, high volume of dollars. And two, there's a real use case here with agency procurement, Vanessa. We need to take this to the powers that be, because I think it's a challenge for a lot of even like mid-market or large businesses as well. So something that I can see scaling across many different ecosystems.
Yeah, for sure.
I would also throw out, Vanessa, you said something that really resonated with me, which is, again, it's the how do I get paid piece. And Avery and I have talked about this. I was lucky enough to spend time with Idris Elba, who's working on a project in Ghana, because the creator economy there can't get paid because they can't get bank accounts. And so the fact that Visa can touch, again, the global spectrum of geography and has access then to be able to use funds for purchase or for sale, I think is really a dynamic opportunity to rewrite a lot of kind of these archaic rails of finance.
I was going to say, it ties into what we talked about before. If you're doing something in Ghana and you can't get paid, then you're shouldering the burden. So how do we use, whether it's things like Visa Direct or Tink, our open banking solution, to get liquidity where it needs to be, when it needs to be, so that people can expand their businesses. So it's super interesting. Happy to talk to all of these folks for sure.
We can make that happen. And then all the other thing also, and I think you're touching on a much larger sea change in culture, which is that if you were a creator in the 1990s, it's not that you didn't want to, but you almost had a really hard time doing, because we didn't have the distribution of the internet. We didn't have the payment systems of a Visa or a Shopify or any of these other things. Now all of this is available to anyone with an idea. And then really it's about your hustle and your muscle, and you're being able to sort of figure out, do you have something that people want? But now so much of the logistics have been removed by companies such as yourself. And I think we don't recognize how different it is to be, your son, my daughter, who's now thinking about their future and doesn't think about I can't, really thinks about I can, as long as I'm willing to put the work in. And that's just such a material shift that I think is so special, frankly, about when we're living, and is why I think things like AI are so scary, because they don't want to be extrapolated away from those opportunities.
Yep, totally agree. Good point.
Final thing to wrap it up, Vanessa. First of all, thank you for giving us so much of your knowledge and your insight. It's been fascinating. I just am interested, thinking about, okay, you've been through the Media Lab, now you're at Visa. All of this is about predicting what technologies are interesting and where we want society and culture to go. What are the ones that you're focusing on, that you're interested in, that are going to be impacting society into the future?
Oh, the future question. If I had a crystal ball, I'd be living on an island somewhere. Um, so, so I think, we talked about supply chain. We've been speaking about embedded finance for years, but I do think that we're at a tipping point where being able to embed value exchange in the thing that you're doing is becoming real. So I think that's more of a near-term future thing. I would say, I'm sitting here in the US, right? In the US, there are two payments that you think about making: buying your first apartment or house, where you're like, oh, I'm making this payment, and buying an engagement ring. And outside of that, you really don't think about making payments. So the more we can actually embed value exchange in the thing that you're thinking about, I think that changes the game in many ways. So I think a lot about that. You asked about AI before. I think along with AI will come much more machine-to-machine transactions. And with that comes a whole host of opportunity, but also a whole host of challenges in terms of authenticating those machines and making sure that they're actually doing what they are supposed to be doing. Banks for ages have to go through something called KYC, which is like know your customer, right? Make sure that the funds actually are legit and you know where they came from. KYM, or know your machine, is going to be critical as we start to think about more and more machine-to-machine transactions. And then we talked earlier, there still are so many markets, whether physical markets like you were talking about Ghana, or particular, whether it's commodities markets, et cetera, or just creators and that friction of how do I get paid when I want to be paid. There's so many markets that aren't yet seamless, right? I think there's so many places where it is easy to pay and get paid. It happens flawlessly and you're protected. At Visa, we're fairly obsessed with what are all the places where that's not true, and how can we think about bringing our know-how and our technology to solve those problems. So I don't know, I have a long list of future things. I don't know what's going to happen. One of my teammates used to say to me, like, don't worry about predicting the future, just don't miss today. And so we think a lot about, like, don't miss today, right? Try and focus on what you can change today. Like you said, the next generation, right? Like, what do you want to change? What can you do today? And in that way, you'll sort of make the future.
Perfect note to end this podcast on. Vanessa, thank you so much for sharing all of your knowledge. Just in hearing you speak, have such a deep understanding of what consumers are thinking about. And it's really clear that this is coming through in Visa's innovation strategy. Also, I'm just hyped on Visa. Billions of endpoints, billions of tokens. It seems like you are certainly not missing today or tomorrow. So thank you for taking the time.
Thank you both. Really nice to chat with you.
Thank you, Vanessa. Avery, I want to be Vanessa Colella when I grow up. She is so good, so smart. Oh, I'm like so inspired by that conversation. Thank you for helping to set that up.
Of course. Wow. I mean, so many good nuggets of information that from, how consumers, what they actually think about saving up for, to the billions of endpoints, to all the really cool work that Visa is doing. I think people just really underestimate the amount of incredible stuff they do behind the scenes because a lot of it isn't consumer facing, but Visa is a damn good company.
And you mentioned this when you were talking to her, but any one of our listeners who have not listened to the Acquired episode about Visa, it is a whirlwind of information that really helps you understand how dominant, but also how innovative that company itself has been. It's one of my favorite episodes of that podcast. All right, Avery, time to wrap up. Great seeing you as always. We will see you next week.
See you next week, Gen Z.